So let's take a look at some of the fact patterns that could arise out of the topics covered in Chapter 11. First one, timing of performance. Ryan purchases radio-controlled vehicles for his racetrack business. Delivery usually takes 30 days, and he purchases them 45 days before his racetrack's grand opening. Is time of the essence? You'll recall from the text that the default rule is that time is generally not of the essence. What does this mean? This means that the supplier can discharge their contract by supplying the vehicles 45 days, 90 days, possibly even 180 days, rather than the usual 30 days that they typically deliver these remote control vehicles. What does that mean for Ryan? That means that Ryan will have to accept the supplier's supply of vehicles, even if it's late, where Ryan's recourse is going to be is through damages. Now, of course, this is assuming that there's no term in the contract that says time is of the essence and they must be delivered by a certain date. If there is a contract, or if there is a contractual term that says time is of the essence and they must be supplied, a court's going to find that the racetrack business breached its obligations by failing to deliver on time. Now, Ryan purchases 100 pizzas for his grand opening. Is time of the essence? This is a circumstance in which the question is going to become whether the court finds that the parties have implied a particular time frame that performance must be performed within. A court is always going to look and say, given the contract, what is a reasonable period of time that a supplier is able to discharge the contract by delivering the pizzas. Can the supplier discharge the contract by delivering the pizzas 2 days late? Probably not. I would have to say it's probably reasonable that if you purchase 100 pizzas for a specific date, that time is of the essence, particularly just given the nature of the contract. If the supplier does deliver the pizzas 2 days late, however, Ryan does have a couple of options. Either he can still accept the pizzas because he's allowed to basically just accept performance the way it's performed, or he has the option to refuse them and consider that the supplier has breached its contract. Let's look at tendering payment. Heidi owes Jody $800. Who is obligated to initiate repayment? Heidi, as the debtor in this case, is obligated to seek me out and pay me. She only has to do it once. Well, I guess let's look at the swimming pool example first. Heidi has the obligation to pay or to offer up payment in a reasonable manner. Is it reasonable to offer to pay me while I'm in a swimming pool? Possibly not. In what circumstances will Heidi no longer be required to pay interest, notwithstanding she didn't repay the debt to Jody? This would be a circumstance in which Heidi has tendered or tried to pay me in a reasonable manner, and I have refused. That's a point in time in which Heidi will no longer be obligated to continue paying me interest, and I'm going to be the one who has to now seek out her in order to get paid. What is legal tender? Money. What is level of government responsible? That's the federal government. What legislation? The Currency Act. We talked about this in the video, talked about the different denominations of money and the fact that vendors have to accept exact change, though practically speaking, vendors are going to be accepting a lot of different forms of payment just so that they can get more customers. Okay, payment methods. Black Friday was awesome. You purchased these amazing boots. However, you notice the heel is cracked. They are clearly not the quality you thought they are. What is your recourse when you pay with cash? Your recourse is to seek damages. You've paid with cash, the transaction is over. Similar with debit. You've paid the cash, or by using your debit card, the bank has debited your account and has paid the vendor. So the transaction is over. Your recourse is through litigation, is through claiming damages. Credit is a little different. Credit, you're going to be able to take a look at the terms of your credit card, and oftentimes in the agreement that the merchant has with the credit card company and the agreement that you have, you may be entitled to cancel the payment and return the boots. PayPal, again, because the amount that you have paid has been deducted from your account with PayPal and has been paid to the vendor, you're probably not going to have much recourse beyond claiming damages. Blake is madly in love with his slightly vindictive girlfriend, Sarah. They fight, break up. While moving out, Sarah takes his debit card and goes on a shopping binge. Is Blake liable for the charges? Yes. Do not give out your PIN. That is one of the terms of the contract, that you will not give out your PIN, and you will be liable to the bank for all the charges that are placed on there by someone who you've given the PIN. What can Blake do? He's going to end up having to go after Sarah, if he wants to go after Sarah for the damages that she has caused him to pay the bank. So let's take a look at an example of substantial performance. Tom hires Dick to paint his house. Part of the contract requires Dick to clean up. Dick paints the house but leaves a mess. Has the contract been substantially performed? In this case, it's arguable that yes, it has. The court's going to look at whether Dick's performance has generally satisfied the obligations, the main thrust of the contract. Have the main obligations been performed? And in this case, given the fact that he's painted the house but has left a mess, it's probably going to be substantially performed. The question is, Tom Stuck's paying for the cost to clean up the house? The answer is no. In this circumstance, Tom is going to be able to deduct all the costs he incurs to complete the remainder of the contract from the amount that is payable to Dick. If he has already paid Dick the whole amount, it's going to translate into a claim for damages. Now, Dick paints 3 of 5 rooms, then abandons the job. Tom hires Harry to use the materials Dick left on the work site to complete the work. Dick now wants payment. If there's no entire contract clause, and this is substantial performance, Tom is going to be entitled to deduct the cost from the cost it took to pay Harry to finish the job from what he owes Dick. However, he is still going to have to pay Dick. However, if there is an entire contract clause, this changes. Remember, an entire contract clause says that Tom will not have to pay Dick anything unless he completes the entire job. And since he hasn't completed the entire job, Tom is not going to have to pay him for painting 3 of the 5 rooms. What Tom is going to have to pay Dick is for the use of the materials that he let Harry use after the contract had been breached. These are voluntarily accepted. He's voluntarily accepted use of those materials, and since it's after the contract has been breached, Tom is going to have to pay Dick for the use of those materials. Now let's look at examples of condition precedent. Kari is discussing being the Canadian distributor of Soy Yum, an American energy drink. However, she's concerned that the agreement will violate Canada's Food and Drug Act. She doesn't want to enter into an agreement that violates regulations. Probably a good idea to create an agreement that involves a true condition precedent. What does that mean? There will be no agreement until she determines whether or not the agreement violates the Food and Drug Act. And if it doesn't, then there's an agreement. If it does, then no agreement has ever existed. Next question. Kari doesn't want to be bound by the distributor agreement until she confirms that Health Canada approves her application to import Soy Yum. This is a situation where you probably want a condition precedent. You still want an agreement. However, you don't want to be bound by the main terms of the distributorship agreement until the happening of an event, i.e. the approval from Health Canada. Soy Yum is in high demand after a successful Shark Tank pitch. Kari's concerned someone else may get rights to Soy Yum. What kind of agreement should she make? This is a circumstance in which maybe she decides just to go for it and actually enter into the contract and hope for the best. So let's take a look at Fluffy. In exchange for watching Errol's cat over Christmas, so Carol is watching Errol's cat, Errol in exchange is going to build Carol a fully serviced shed next spring. But what happens? What happens if Carol has a family emergency and cannot watch the cat? Well, in this case, it looks like it's an executory contract. It looks like neither party has performed either obligation, and if the parties want to, they can agree to rescind. Next example, Carol watches the cat. However, in the spring, Errol discovers that Carol's home electrical system cannot support another line without a new breaker box beyond his expertise. This is a situation where the parties may consider accord and satisfaction. Is there something else that Errol can perform that Carol would consider as a substitute, basically, for building a fully serviced shed? And finally, after making the contract, Errol asks Carol to shovel the driveway in addition to watching the cat. This is a circumstance where the parties can enter into a new agreement where both parties provide additional consideration. So let's take a look at whether or not a term is a condition or a warranty. Pam hires a professional photographer for her son's birthday. What terms would you consider to be conditions? Now remember, conditions go to the heart of the contract. They're the major terms in a contract. So in this case, those terms would likely be that the professional photographer shows up, that takes photos, and provides those photos to Pam. What terms would you consider to be warranties? Perhaps warranties would be the quality of the photos, or perhaps the number of the photos, or what sort of file format that the photographer provides the photos. What sort of term could be an innominate term or an intermediate term? Well, actually, in this case, I would say that the quality of the photos could be something that could be an intermediate term. Imagine Pam's surprise when she receives a box full of completely black photos because the photographer kept the lens cap on. That could probably be considered a breach of a condition. However, if the quality of the photos were such that, say, maybe the editing was slightly off, that could be something that is really just a minor breach of the term of warranting the quality of the photos that the photographer is taking. Now let's look at a situation involving an anticipatory breach. Annie hires a contractor to develop her basement with construction starting on April 1st. This is a little bit old. It says 2019. Whoops. On January 1st, the contractor advises that he'll be unable to perform the contract. What can Annie do? Assuming that it's 2020 and not 2019, the contractor has provided notice that they anticipate breaching the contract. It's an anticipatory breach. Annie has two options. She can either accept the breach and sue for damages, and what this allows her to do is basically hire another contractor and move on, or Annie can not accept the breach and still insist on performance. What does that mean? That means that Annie can not hire another contractor and wait and see if on April 1st the contractor arrives to perform the contract. The trick with this one, and if he doesn't, then she still gets to sue for damages. But the trick with this is that if Annie refuses to accept the breach and insists on performing the performance of the contract, if the contractor does show up on April 1st, and Annie is not prepared for the contract to be performed, it's actually going to be Annie that's in breach. So next example, rather than accepting the breach, Annie insists on performance. The parties initially contracted that Annie would pay $10 per sheet of drywall. March 30th, the price of drywall tanks to $1 per sheet. April 1st, the contractor shows up to perform and Annie refuses. Who's liable for breach of contract? Well, this is the situation where Annie would be liable for the breach of contract. Because she refused to accept the breach and insisted on performance, it is up to the contractor. The contractor can still attend on April 1st and perform the obligations, even though obviously at this point it's not going to be in Annie's best interest and she's now in a losing contract. Bailey hires Kingston to replace her roof. She contracts Kingston to use the highest quality shingles. In breach, Kingston uses a discount variety. Can Bailey discharge the contract? This is a type of circumstance in which Bailey is not going to be able to discharge the contract. She is going to have to continue with performance and then sue for damages. Why is that? Because she can't give the shingles back. The shingles have been used. The shingles are already on the house. She cannot discharge the obligations. The contract has been performed. She has to perform her end of the bargain and sue for damages.